Everybody, well, welcome to Summer Shipping Week 9. Week 9 is pretty important, not because of 9, but because it's July now. So, hello, July. This is just kind of a refresher. At the beginning, we said we're going to try to go until the end of July. So, at the very end of July, that's when we are booked for, but we might carry into August, maybe a couple weeks, but end of July is what we got for sure, for sure. So, well, into the home stretch. So, hello, July. So last week we talked about authentication, and in our breakout sessions we split up into little pieces of talked about just some auth jargon. And so today, what I wanted to do is talk about something basics with HTTP. And this is probably something I should have done a lot earlier, but I wanted to make sure that people are familiar with some of these tools or technologies or concepts, and that if you go to deploy your website, you might have to have to do some of these things. And so just want to make sure that all our bases are covered. For our intros, we're going to talk about, again, some more interview prep. That's in its second week now, and that's going well. Going to share everybody who's on the demo list. We'll recap our first 30 days of shipping. And then I have a little thing that I want to talk about, which is the benefits of learning in public. So it's something that we've been doing. We've been kind of expressing for, since SOS has started for 9 weeks now. And there are some fruits to that labor. So that's some things that we're going to talk about. And then finally, we'll do our breakout sessions. So this week's presentation essentially equip us so that we get to the breakout sessions, we have a baseline of understanding, and we can each dive into our respective kind of sections and dig in there with effectiveness. All right, so our objectives for the summer, these have been updated ever so slightly. And this is something that, as I was saying it over and over and over every week, I realized something was missing. So our objectives over the summer now are 3, no longer 2, there's 3. And the first one is, is essentially getting noticed. And traditionally, when you get noticed, you apply, you go to the company and give them your cover letter and your resume. And that's traditionally how you've done it. But on the internet this summer, what we can do is something very different, and we can eventually make our public resumes really important and attract people to us. So that's one thing that we want to do. We want to get noticed, get the interview. The second thing is we want to get the job. And in order to get to the job, you got to pass the interview. So you got to get the interview and then pass the interview. And so that's what interview prep has been becoming. And I'm really thankful to everybody who's been a part of that and getting that up and running. And then finally, it's the job skills, the things that you need on the job to be successful. And today we're going to actually talk about some of that. It's going to be pragmatic things around HTTP. But the other thing we want to talk about is the public resume. And so this is just, I know I've been talking about a lot. I know it's kind of abstract to understand, but let's see that in action. And I know there's a couple people on the call. I'm going to mention you guys. I hope that's okay. I didn't get your okay beforehand, but I try to use as much public information as possible. So SOS interview prep. Oh, whoops, I just skipped. So we had our second meetup on Tuesday. Lots of good stuff is happening in there. Pedro and everybody is innovating. And as we talked about for the breakout sessions for today, we're actually going to steal from ideas that were picked up in the interview prep. It's also really cool to see mentors just dropping some knowledge about hey, this is how you interview, these little tricks of the trade. And I wish we saved all those little nuggets, but there's just so many little things that that just happen in those. It's best that if you essentially are there to hear it. I know for people in the EU, it might be a little bit more difficult, or in just different parts of the world. And so we are going to find ways to make that, we're going to try to see if we can get that knowledge asynchronously. But yeah, it's a really great opportunity. There's a new Discord server, so if you haven't joined it yet, you should also check that one out. The reason why there's a Discord server there, so we can have lots of little breakout rooms, little interview prep rooms. We had over 50 participants, and it's been so far, it's been really great. So they're Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, and join us if you can. All right, demo list. This is where we were at last week. After we presented, whoop, whoop, yep. So you can see some people's counters have incremented, and we have a new entrant. So it grows. So congratulations to Van, Samson, and Faye for demoing last week, and let's keep on. Hopefully we'll have some more this week. So, all right, 30 days of shipping essentially wrapped up a couple days ago, and I want to recap kind of what happened. But first, some shout outs. So we had over 20 people that shipped, and I wasn't able to get the analytics for how many impressions that we got, but there are some companies that did the insights, and for the last week we hit tens of thousands of impressions just from these hashtags. And depending on who picked them up and who saw it, you know, some tweets just get seen by a lot of people. And so it was really cool just to see all those numbers. And so here's everybody who had at least one hashtag. I might have missed one or two. And but you know, everybody here, thank you for learning in public. That's a huge part of what we're doing, as well as staying accountable to yourself, if only for at least one day. So congratulations, everybody. Yeah, good job, team. Let's go. And so round two, we're gonna actually do things a little bit different for round two, and not gonna be so strict about it. So shipping, quote unquote, shipping every day is hard. In fact, it might be impossible. You're not actually shipping code every day. You're just doing something that's more than zero. And so the idea is when we say shipping in terms of this hashtag, it really just means the minimum quantum of work that feels like work. Oh, somebody, you are, can you mute yourself? I think there is, okay, I think that's handled. So essentially you can do documentation, comment cleanups, install Prettier, just anything that still counts as shipping. And just the idea is don't have a day where you just have a flat zero, right? Right now we're about, I think 23, 24 people who've done it. Let's get to 30. So we want about 6 more people. Come on, guys. Just at least one time this month, tag friends who might be interested, tag technologies that you use. That has actually been, I think, a very useful thing for both myself and others. So as we will see next. So let's get more and more people on board, and it doesn't have to be super strict. You can miss a day, it's okay. But the idea is that we're going to be shipping this month of July and just be a part of it. Whoops, I might have duplicated that twice. Whoops, anyways. All right, so benefits of learning in public. I want to talk about this because, you know, it's been abstract for a long time, and I said, hey, this will pay off down the line. And here we are, week 9, and, you know, have we seen any payoff? And it's hard to see if anything has, but let me describe a few examples. So next week, I'm really excited because we're going to actually have a guest, and that is Swix. So this is Sean. And what's super exciting about Sean is if you look at his description, he owns the description learninpublic.org and actually goes to his new book that he just launched yesterday. But anyways, he created an essay called Learn in Public, and he really, really kind of encouraged people to do it. He really started this trend and this movement. And he's going to be here next week, which is crazy. So he contacted me on a Twitter DM. He just found out about summer shipping and, you know, realized that we were trying to learn in public, build in public. And he's like, hey, you know, how can I help? And so we're actually going to have him visit us next Thursday, which is really exciting at this time. Another thing that happened, I think, was it like this week, but Theodore received a tweet from Xamarin or / Microsoft for a potential guest post on their blog. So nothing is like 100% certain yet, but there was this tweet. And so Theodora had just, you know, fixed a bunch of bugs in her app, and she's making progress. So, you know, the last few months, things have been, you know, going really well. And, you know, she's hit some snags, but she's persevered. And people over at Xamarin HQ have been kind of watching her progress, right? And then out of the blue, she gets this tweet. Hey, congrats. It would be really awesome if you wanted to do a guest blog on the Xamarin blog on your story and show off the app when you're ready. Let me know. I mean, that's incredible, right? That's something that, you know, is just something that happened on Twitter. And she also was mentioning maybe Sync Fusion too. So there might be potential for, you know, other other blog posts as well. So that's pretty crazy. And this is something that Samson shared with me. I don't know to what extent it was necessarily over a tweet, but Samson received some inbound interest in working with a small startup. And so somebody saw his profile, they saw his, you know, Twitter, they saw his, you know, just website, they looked at it and they're like, whoa, this guy is legit. And they reached out to him for an opportunity to do something. We don't know what will come of it, but hey, these things happen. And so these are examples of people who are generating, getting inbound interest. And it's all because you're doing things in public, right? And this is what I'm talking about. You get luckier when you do things in public. And these are examples of that. And so again, shout out to you know, everybody here for just kind of doing that. And you know, the internet works in funny ways, and sometimes it can get you more opportunities to open doors for you. So that's just examples of that happening for us right now in summer shipping. So that's benefits of learning in public. We're actually seeing some fruits of that initial labor, and I'm sure if you continue to do it, you'll get more to come. One thing I do want to highlight, and this is actually really, really, really smart, something that Theodora has been doing, um, is if you notice in her post, she tags the technologies used. And one of the best things that you can do is if you are using a technology, something that's perhaps not as well known, or it's a smaller tech community, if you tag the people who are, or the technology that's being used, they will most likely like notice. Just so the other day, I tagged, essentially I was building something with Hasura, and I like tagged them, and they commented on the tweet. And so it's something that can happen for communities of, like if they have under 10,000 Twitter followers, they will engage with people more likely to engage. So it's something worth doing. And one other thing I wanted to talk about is the benefits of reaching out to mentors. And in fact, instead of doing this myself, I'm going to ask Van if he's on the line to talk about this very briefly himself. I didn't really prepare him a slide, and I think we talked about this just beforehand that I throw this on him. But Van, if you're on the call, you want to just like give a little spiel about your experience with reaching out to mentors and people who can help you out.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, so I really encourage y'all to go and like eat up as much of your time as you can, because again, like Phil said before, like with like interview prep, like there's no better way to get like any interview prep than people who really do the interviewing themselves. It just makes the most sense. At least in my personal experience, for example, like I had to get ready for an interview in about the span of like 2 months. I'm gonna be honest, I had no idea how to think of dementia like Tai Lopez. Yes, I do. I had no idea like how I was gonna do it. I mean, like I had no idea. So fortunately, I met with one of the mentors, and he helped me formulate a plan and a general like plan of action to even like get that done. Will it work? I don't know. I hope it does. But honestly, it's better than wasting like another week of my time that I clearly don't have to figure this out and just to get it off the ground running. So in short, there are benefits to reaching out your mentors and stuff like that. And I really encourage you to, because even if like, let's say you're not able to pick something out from their knowledge, it'll help the process go by faster and save you time in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where mentors, we all want to hear from you guys and just see what you guys are like, struggling with or whatnot. And one of the things I'm going to encourage people to do in July is to reach out to a mentor who best fits kind of your career aspirations. So if you see somebody who's like, oh, wow, this person kind of has had a career that I really want to emulate, reach out to them, send them an email, send them a Discord, just say you met them via SOS and you would like to see if they can be available for a 30-minute Zoom call to talk about just how you could get to where they're at. And that's something that I would definitely, I definitely welcome lots of those conversations. And I know all of our mentors are open to that as well. So definitely take up that just resource. Thanks, man.
No problem.
Alrighty. So next up, we're just going to talk about just the topic that we really that I wanted to focus on today, which is essentially a base level understanding of HTTP and some like a little bit of wrinkles that I think are useful for projects and on the job. So I'm calling it pragmatic HTTP. So let's go over some extremely basic stuff. HTTP just stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. You guys probably already know that. It's really important because it basically powers so much of communication on the web. and so it's extremely important. It's really foundational, but it's under taught. If you take a networking class, you're going to go deep into it. But not every school requires networking. That might be an elective. And sometimes it's covered in operating systems as well. But if you don't really get it there, then you just somehow are supposed to know it. Like you show up on the job and like everyone's talking about all this stuff and you're like, yeah, sure. I exactly know what that is. So today we're going to make sure that you don't like walk into a situation where you're caught like, oh yeah, totally know what that is. And you have no idea. So we'll get the basics. We're going to talk about some other concepts that you might not have done before. And so you're a little bit anxious about. And so we'll knock that out. So some basics about HTTP. It's basically how we send messages across the web. If you like essentially make a browser request just to google.com, well, it's actually making an HTTP request to google.com and it's saying, get me whatever's there. That's literally what the browser is doing. So it's sending a GET request to google.com, and it sends some default headers, and essentially that's how that message gets started. And eventually you get an HTTP response. So it's basically a request and a response. Pretty simple at a high level. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. Just to kind of see like how these URLs are formatted. If you look over, actually let's ignore the things on the left over here. That's not super interesting. Usually this is the domain, right? Usually there's not a port that we can see. But then you usually have a path. So this is like, just once you're at the domain, what exactly you're looking at. And then you see this little question mark, which is after that, it's a query parameters. So these are a bunch of pairs that are a key and value separated by an equal, right? And each one is an ampersand. And finally, you have this little hashtag, which is the fragment. And so, for example, a lot of you guys have probably implemented, or maybe not implemented, but seen websites where you can scroll to the middle of a website and you can get a link to that. How is that done? Well, that's done by this little fragment thing. And so these concepts, this is called the query parameters. This is the fragment and all that good stuff. One little thing about query parameters, and I don't know exactly, it might depend on the library, but if you have two things, if you like tag equals networking and tag equals like browsers or something along those lines, then when you can potentially even access them as an array in your JavaScript. So that's a little piece of trivia. That might be too much information. But anyways, HTTP requests, you probably have all seen them. You kind of have seen terminology related to all this stuff. And so let's dive in a little bit deeper. So one of the things that people get really like scared of with HTTP is HTTPS, because you do HTTP locally and you're like localhost 3000, right? And it's running on HTTP localhost 3000. And then you're like, oh wait, but all these websites online are over HTTPS and my localhost is 3000. So how am I going to even do that? And so let's talk about the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. So HTTP, everything is kind of just sent over in plain text. It's not encrypted over the wire. It runs on port 80, and so that's HTTP. HTTPS is just HTTP over TLS, which is, I think, transport layer security. And then they will encrypt the data that's going over. So anybody who's trying to man in the middle you can't read what you're doing. Unless they have messed with your certificates. But that's a little piece of detail we don't need to get into. So this happens on port 443, just a little convention to memorize. And it's a lot of handshakes that happen to make that secure. But essentially, in order to make this work, you need to get a certificate. And that's why on your local machine, you can't really run it because you need to create some sort of certificate. So you normally have to pay for this, and you get them from a certificate authority. But there's a new thing called Let's Encrypt that's just said, nah, let's not pay for these things. They're really easy to get, and you can get them for free. If you go to let'sencrypt.org, then it will tell you how to do this process. So if you've been paying for certificates, you've been doing it wrong. Let's not pay for it. Go to let'sencrypt.org. Yeah, so that's one thing that people get tripped up on. All right, another thing that people get tripped up on is just headers, and like a lot of times I've encountered people who don't even realize that HTTP requests have headers, and so and it's like, okay, well, let's make sure that everybody understands that. And so there's a few common headers that you'll probably see on requests. You'll see stuff like authorization, maybe accept headers, content type, maybe cookies, and so these are things that you can metadata that you can put on top of your request. Sometimes they're required for the request to work. And so I wrote a few here. The big one here is actually the authorization header. This one's really important. There's have stuff like, it's a basic auth. If it's basic auth, then essentially what you have is you set the header to like the word basic and then some base 64 encoded user : password. And that's how it's done. I think a lot of people get tripped up on this base 64 encoding, and you just send it over without it being base 64 encoded. And it's like, why is this not working? And so that's one little gotcha that a lot of people run into. So just little stuff like that. And then there might be bearer tokens, and you might have seen that if you're working on OAuth. So just some things to get familiar with. And then on the responses, same kind of business happens. Yeah, so I talked about that. And the big thing here is don't be afraid of HTTP headers. For some reason, people just forget. Sometimes, I don't know why it is, but a lot of the time they forget that they are part of the request and that you need to think about them too. And because they have all these weird terms, they're scary. Maybe because you have to memorize the terms, it kind of feels like CSS. It's like this entire language of stuff that you don't know. But they're not scary. Just kind of easy to work with like that. Okay, so one thing that oftentimes people see people use are form tags in HTML. So one thing that can be confusing is this form tag will actually send an HTTP request itself. So when you I used to ask not necessarily an interview, well, it was kind of an interview, not necessarily a question, but an exercise that we would do where we would have people implement a really small web app, and they would hit a backend API and try to get data from it, render it, show that, all that good stuff. But a lot of candidates would use this form tag when doing this interview, and they would just get confused because it's like, okay, this form is doing something weird. It's making requests that I don't understand what it's doing. And what they were doing is they're essentially making this form request, but they didn't realize that the form, when you use this, it formats the HTTP request in a certain way, especially the content type. So it sets a content type header, and that can actually mess up with some API calls. And so that's something that not a lot of people realize when they're using the little form tag. And so it's something to kind of realize. There's an excellent resource, again, Mozilla documentation. If you don't rely on Mozilla documentation, I personally think you're doing it wrong. They are essentially my gold standard. And this is how you can send and return form data, and familiarize yourself with that before using the form tag in HTML. All right, so a little mention on cookies, because cookies are something that for some reason a lot of people don't really have a good sense of when, I don't know if they don't teach it in school very often or exactly what goes on. But essentially, HTTP is supposed to be stateless. And when people were first trying to come up with how to use the internet, like Netscape and all those guys, they're like, okay, well, we don't want to have people type in their username and password every single time we fetch data. Like every single web page that they go to, they have to log in again. That's terrible. So what they did was they tried to introduce state, and they basically created cookie crumbs. And essentially that was how people were able to store state initially on the internet. So it's used nowadays for authentication. It keeps you logged in. It's also used largely for tracking, which is now why you see this really annoying thing that comes up and says, hey, this website uses cookies. Like, are you sure you want to continue using this? And so we have our good friends over at GDPR compliance to have those annoying pop-ups. But essentially that's what they're used for. And one thing about cookies is you have a bunch of cookies on a website. They are saved by the browser, and they're sent on every HTTP request that you make back to the same domain. So if you are on Google's website or maybe Twitter, and you're logged in, there's going to be a little cookie that says who you are or your session, and that gets sent on every single request, right? We talked about sessions last time, but we didn't really talk about cookies last time. So I wanted to make sure that we did talk about it a little bit. And so this is kind of how browsers kind of implemented a solution around HTTP being stateless. And so cookies are also accessible from the JavaScript. So if you're trying to access cookies, you can within your code, but you cannot access HTTP only cookies. And sometimes a website will implement that for security reasons so that you can't get, for example, the authentication cookie from the JavaScript. So there's other forms of storage on the browser. Cookies are just kind of one of the primary ones, one of the oldest ones. But there's other things like local storage and IndexedDB that you can use to save stuff that when somebody closes their browser, they come back, the state is still saved. So some useful stuff to know. But cookies, really important when it comes to HTTP and browsers. All right, another concept that people are very unfamiliar with when it comes to, this is more APIs, but also related to HTTP, is webhooks. And so you might have heard this term before, but just something that I want to make sure that you're familiar with. What is a webhook? Well, essentially, if you imagine you are building Twitter DMs, right? And you can send messages, right? So I can message people, but what happens when they message me? How do I know that I got a message? There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can ask the server, hey, do I have any new messages? Hey, do I have any new messages? Hey, do I have any new messages? but that would be kind of annoying. Essentially, just imagine this is the case. This is not exactly how webhooks work, but this is kind of the motivating kind of idea. But then you could keep on asking them, or you could get them to send you a message. And so webhooks are not exactly used for this particular scenario that I described, but it's more used for if you are building an API integration. The idea is like you have a server that creates an endpoint that will listen for messages that come from another server. And that's essentially all a webhook is. It's something that you create on your side to listen to messages from another server. And that's just, I don't know if I've described that the best, but essentially webhooks are kind of a pattern. It's more of a design pattern for listening to messages. So that's essentially what you need to learn about. And one thing that I often see webhooks being implemented with is somebody will have a endpoint set up on their device or on their server and listening for data. And so that will get a live stream of all the data that's coming in. And then they'll have essentially a audit job that runs maybe once an hour to make sure that they didn't miss any messages from those webhooks. So anyways, at a high level, this is what webhooks are about. Very useful when you're thinking about just HTTP integrating with third-party services and stuff. One thing I should have probably mentioned this up a little bit earlier, but endpoints. When I first started on my job, like my first job ever, I hadn't really used the terminology endpoint. I might have heard it, but I didn't really understand what it was. People were throwing it around everywhere, and I was like, what? And so I was just really confused what they were talking about. They're like, just build an endpoint. I was like, yeah, I'll go do that. And I had no idea what they were talking about. But I realized it's just like, oh, that's a place where requests come in. And so HTTP endpoints are basically just like URL handlers. Every single path that you have is probably going to relate to an endpoint of some sort. It's almost like calling a different function. So that's essentially just what an endpoint is, clearing up some jargon. One thing that while you are developing APIs, you should use a tool something like Postman. Essentially, it's a workbench that allows you to save HTTP queries. And as you can see, it makes it really easy to kind of build requests. It has all these authorization headers, all this stuff. It makes it easy to formulate these HTTP requests because oftentimes a browser does a lot of work to massage the data such that it's sent in a way that's easy. But doing it yourself can be a little bit difficult. So Postman kind of helps you along with that process. You should be using it or something similar. If you're using GraphQL, there are other technologies like Graphical and that do a similar job. But this is one thing that can really, really help your workflow. I know anytime I'm building an HTTP, I didn't use it at Uber because I wasn't working on our front-facing HTTP endpoints. But anytime you're building HTTP stuff, very commonly you'll use something like Postman. And then another tool that I want to make sure is in everyone's arsenal is an ngrok. And this is a really, really useful tool. So essentially what you can do is you can open a tunnel from your local server to the internet. And essentially if you just look on the right, what's happening is the ngrok is forwarding the localhost server at port 4390 to this HTTP 018bad74.ngrok.io. So if we were to go to 018bad74.ngrok.io, we would actually be able to see what was running on localhost. So that's one way I can share my work with you without deploying my work anywhere, right? It just, now there's a tunnel to it via the internet, it's public. Definitely use this for your personal websites. Not your personal websites, for your projects that you guys are collaborating on with your teams to share work and be like, hey, I want to see, like, hey, I'm working on this, check this out. And that's one way to share work really easily in real time. It's also, ngrok is probably one of the easiest ways to test webhooks. And so I don't know how much that makes sense, but just know ngrok, put it in your arsenal, extremely useful. All right, so that's kind of the items that I wanted to talk about with HTTP. Hopefully that is useful. It gives you a few more tools in your tool belt, clears up some stuff, and you learned a couple of things. So action items for this week. In fact, it's very similar now for most days. But instead of shipping every day, I want you to have a mentality of no 0 days. So you don't have to ship something because shipping kind of implies large. Just have a no 0 day, which is all right, I'm going to do something every day, even if it's something very small, right? You can have 4 very small days in a row, and that will just kind of help you get back into the habit of making progress. So that's what we're going to move now towards, is a mentality of no 0 days. And I actually stole this from our future guest, Sean, when he comes next week. I'll probably mention this, but essentially I saw that and I was like, okay, that's a easier way to digest Ship Daily, is have no 0 days. Again, try to make the demo list by the end of July. For those of you who are about to demo, like, yes, 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 good job, good job. I don't know if we're going to have any demos today, but we'll see. And then finally, the big thing I want everyone to do is meet with a mentor who best aligns with your career goals. Reach out to them, right? Everybody, like, go to the mentor list, go do that. I'll make when I send out my email tomorrow, I will comment on kind of the importance of doing this, and I'll make sure you have a link and try to nudge you again. But it's really important that you take advantage of the opportunity while we have it, and don't let that slip. So another thing that what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out a survey. I want to see engage interest in study groups. Some people, I think a lot of people want to prepare for interviews and algorithms and data structures and all that stuff, but where to start, creating a study group around that could be useful. Other people are more interested in databases and just infrastructure, and it can be really cool to build a group to read the book, like designing data intensive applications. And then this other thing, HPBN, this is high performance browser networking. It's another book that I recommend. All the stuff that I talk about in here and more, and in much more detail, is in there. It's one of the best books I've ever seen on, like, teaching people pragmatic skills, and highly, highly, highly recommend that one as well. The other thing I want to do is recommend, gauge interest in hackathons. So one thing that I have realized, and this is kind of a cheat thing, is like, on your resume, if you have only one project, it's not the end of the world, but it looks good when you have, like, a couple, right? And it's just because it's filler. One way to get one of those filler projects on your resume really quickly is just do a hackathon. Spend a few days and boom, build something out, and you got something that's pretty cool. So want to gauge interest in that. So action items, the big one here, get a mentality of no 0 days. And the other one is meet with a mentor who best aligns with your career goals. Take advantage of the resources that are available to you while you have them. So, and with that, we are now going to move into demos. Yes, Andrew, there's a mentor list. Yeah. Hey, before we do that, let me show everybody the mentor list. And let's make sure that we get this on video so that everyone knows where it is. So in the Discord, in the README, if you go to the README, which I know no engineer ever reads the README, much to their dismay, but there is this thing called the mentor list. And you click on it, there's a list of our mentors and a way to contact them. And a lot of them, in fact, even have a way to book something. You don't even have to send them a message. You can just book a time with them directly. Other ones like prefer you to DM them first, right? But some of them you can just book directly and ask a question, and definitely do that. And some of them have their emails that you can kind of just reach out to. So take advantage of this, right? So you see all these links. The other thing is they oftentimes have their LinkedIn. So you can even see their LinkedIn where they've worked in the past, and maybe they worked at a company that you think is really cool and you want to learn about it, right? Or you see some, like experience that they have. It's like, oh, this is really cool. I want to learn how to do that. How do they do that? How do they learn that? Take advantage of this. Like, this is definitely available to you guys, and want to make sure that everybody is aware. So that's I haven't perhaps done a good enough job of stressing that this is kind of what we want to do, but I'm gonna make amends for previous times for not making that clear in the past. So that's essentially what that is. And I think I got a few messages. I have quite a few messages in the chat to catch up on, but yes, I have a lot of tabs open. Alrighty. So do we have any demos for the day? All right, we have 3 demos. Sweet. We will go Jason, Michael, and then Theodora. So I have to first stop sharing my screen and then give you guys permission to share. So give me one moment. All right, the permissions are now enabled. So you guys, whenever you're ready, Jason, you first.
Let's see where. All right, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so my project is a programming language written in Python. It's concatenative and stack-based, which means that basically every function operates on a stack and modifies or returns a stack. Right now, its capabilities are rather simple, but you see, when you start the REPL, it runs up an initialization file, which is why it says start file ran. And like I can put a string on the stack if I wanted to. I could duplicate it. I could take it off, and I could leave pressing Control C, and that's it really.
That's super cool. That's super cool. Oh my, yeah. I want to, okay. So like back in, when I first made my post, about like, I think I made a post maybe 2 months ago on Reddit talking about how to have a successful summer, what's it called? Just project. And one of the things I said is like, like if you aren't passionate about, what like you don't know what to pick, you just pick something at random and you pick a programming language that may not be the best choice because, for X, Y, and Z reasons. But if you're really passionate about it, 100% go do it. And one of the things that get me really excited is I think Jason is like, he's very passionate about this, but stack-based programming languages also, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it's kind of the basis behind how Bitcoin does their transactions. And what's really exciting about that is it's essentially the same kind of concept that Jason just presented. So he basically implemented something that's almost probably as powerful as the Bitcoin's, I think it's script. And that's essentially what's called it's called the script language for Bitcoin. But you just implemented that and it powers Bitcoin. And it's just like, whoa, that's super cool to see it. And just got really excited seeing all of that. So this is essentially what, is going through a few emotions right now. And anyways, very excited to have seen that. And thank you for sharing that, Jason.
Thanks.
All right, give him a round of applause, everybody. All righty. So next up, we're just finishing our claps right now in the chat. Next up, we have, I think it's Michael. So Michael, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, hello. Feels good to finally be demoing. So
Hey.
I built a project this past weekend for Microsoft had like a VS Code hackathon. So I've never made a VS Code extension, but I've used JavaScript a few times, so I figured why not? So it's pretty basic. It just adds a few commands to VS Code. So you can hit Control-Shift-P if you've never used VS Code to get this command palette. And what it does is just in whatever like repo you're in or whatever folder, just drops in a few problems from the internet. So the easiest one was Reddit. Reddit has a subreddit called Daily Programmer. And so every day they post like a new thing. And then, so I just used their API, got a problem, slapped it in a markdown file. You can preview the markdown file so it looks a little bit better and get a little bit of context for a problem. And then it generates like a starter file. Right now it just defaults to Python. So that's the gist of the project. And it supports a few other websites. So Project Euler, if you're a bit more advanced, definitely not my speed. And then there is also CodingBat, which is a really small website. We use that in high school. And plan to support, other websites and things in the future. But yeah, that's the general gist. It's just like a quick poke around the source repo. There's the actual extension code, which is pretty basic. A lot of it is spun up for you, but yeah, it's just sort of generic TypeScript file. It goes and basically makes an API call. And then on the other side of things, there's a server, which is deployed on Heroku right now. And it just one endpoint for like the actual problem itself. And depending on the data in the body, it will send back different information. I did this to sort of like abstract away the back end and the front end, so I could send, like I could change the server, redeploy it, and I didn't have to like republish the whole extension, which would have been annoying. So yeah, that's the basic gist.
That's awesome. Well, congrats, Michael. And I think, Michael, I think you might have also won a prize at the hackathon for this one. Is that right?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So I was solo hacking. I think there weren't that many people, so the competition wasn't that stiff. But
Hey, but
yeah,
win is a win. We'll take it.
Wins a win. We take those. It was best use of external API. It's pretty cool. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's give Michael a round of applause. And one thing I want to say about a project like that is like, I think that's like, it's like also really fun to talk about right before an interview. Somebody might be asking you like, oh, like, you know, like, what did you do? I built this thing. And then you can always be like, I built it, but I didn't necessarily use it. So I might be rusty on this interview, but you know, start off with a joke like that.
Yeah,
but,
that's true.
but it's like a great way to just kind of break the ice because that's kind of what you're doing right now is you're going to be, you know, interviewing. And so obviously it's something that people kind of need and is a useful product.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, you guys.
All right. Thanks, Michael. So another round of applause. And I think next up we've got, it was Theodora that was next.
Hello guys, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Okay, so I begin to make my application look pretty and get rid of the bugs, if I could tell them like that. Basically, if you have users that they just use the application really wrong. Okay, so the login screen works. Sign up, forget password, and you receive an email with to verify your email, to reset your password, or to make sure that you want to delete your account. Forget password looks like this, pretty simple. Sign up as well, pretty simple. And now I am going to log in. It might take a while because the emulator is slow.
It's all good. All good.
Okay, so it went really good. So I tried to make it really simple. I must underline that I'm pretty bad with front end, so this is kind of the best that I could come up with.
It looks pretty good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It comes with little helps here and there because I was giving it for my friends to test it and find bugs, and they had questions. So I just said that, you know, everybody could have questions, so it would be very good if they could find the answers in the app. So if you press the help button, it's just gonna pop these things on. If you press it again, it's gonna hide. I'm having here edit account, delete account, sign out. Okay, if you add the subject, you have a little help as well over here. If you go to your subjects, I have a search button now. So if you have like 20 subjects and you're looking for maths, you just search it like you're doing in your contact books in your phone. And if you select a subject, I try to kind of divide the subject details a little bit. It's not done yet. How much is the continuous assessment weight? How much you have remaining to add to give you a little bit more information. You have help buttons here as well. So they're still in work. So, you know, they're just ideas at the moment. Okay, if you long press on a subject, you can delete it. Okay, you have that small one in blue. It's the name of my assignment. I know it's not a good name to test it, but you know, I was in a hurry. You could say like project one, or I think I can add one now for to see it better. So project one, the exam weight is 10, and let's say we did 88. So it's saved, and now you can see it at the bottom of the list, project one. It's a continuous assessment. The result was 88, and the weight of the continuous assessment was 10%. Yeah, and kind of that's it. You can edit or delete this subject also. And
oh, Theodore, you just cut out. Oh, I think we'll give it a couple, just a second to see if that's Let me message in the chat real quick.